Gaye Payze is from the Whakatane Kiwi Trust, and she'll be addressing trap shyness. Since 2014, Gaye has been working with the Whakatane Kiwi Trust, leading the predator control program for the Whakatane Kiwi project. Currently a 2,500 hectare urban kiwi project situated within Whakatane and Ohopi townships. In her role, Gaye has managed the trapping and result monitoring networks, as well as the all-important teams of dedicated volunteers. She's incredibly dedicated and determined to stay one step ahead of the predators. Good luck. Through continual improvements to the trapping network, trialling novel methodologies, and investing in volunteer training and embracing new technologies that emerge as a result of the Predator Free 2050 program. So I'd like to invite Gaye Payze to come up, and I will fit her with this beautiful little thing that I keep forgetting. There you go. Bang that up. Gaye, you know how to operate these things. There you go.
Kia ora koutou whānau. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you to Manawhina for their warm welcome to us all this morning, and thank you to BCA for inviting me to come be a speaker. I'm pretty humbled about being up here because I know what a knowledgeable audience I have out here, and I hope I'm going to keep you awake after lunch. So I see that my notes are not showing, so I'll just quickly duck into my pocket. Right. I think trap shyness is one of the really topical issues in pest control. It's been a really topical issue for the Whakatane Kiwi Trust because when you're doing a kiwi management project like we are, we're trying to target stoats because they're the nemesis of kiwi chicks, and trying to get a stoat to prefer to go into one of our traps rather than to scoff a kiwi chick is a pretty hard task. And we, like many kiwi management projects, have seen this pattern where it's all going fine to start with. You're catching all your stoats, your kiwi chicks are all surviving, but over time your trapping seems to become less and less effective as Kim King reminds us that long-term trapping projects select for the trap-shy stoat. But it's not. This trap shyness is not unique to stoats. It's a feature of all these pests that we are targeting: rats, possums, cats, ferrets, everything that you try to trap. It becomes an issue. So for those of you who are doing eradication projects, this issue is on your horizon if you haven't already reached that point yet. So just see if I can do it. So what is trap shyness? Well, I'm coming from very much a practitioner, someone who's been a trapper, who's been, like I say, inducting trappers, and but also more lately trying to think about landscape scale, how do you do a big project. And ever since I've been asked to do this topic, I've been sort of listening out to the conversations about trap shyness, and I was fortunate to be at the National Kiwi Hui a couple of weeks ago and hear John Bissell talking about trapping ferrets, and I've listened around the conversations and done a bit of Googling, crash course in neophobia in the last few weeks, and it seems to me that how this issue gets talked about is really coming from who's doing the talking and where their perspective is. You can't go past this term neophobia when you start talking about trap shyness, although other people say trap shyness isn't neophobia. So neophobia is it's just a fancy word to mean that there's a natural wariness of animals to novel things in the environment, be those food lures, be those traps, other objects, scents. And there is actually a whole body of knowledge in ecology that has studied this whole thing about neophobia, and I'm sure there's a few ecologists out in the audience here who are aware of this. But generally, what that's saying is it's common across a whole range of different species, and it is an evolutionary survival tactic, and even we have it. For instance, have you ever tried to feed a baby new foods? You know they're good for them, but they don't want to have a bar of it. So, you know, it's us as well. So generally, there's some general patterns that the ecologists have found that prey species like rats and rabbits are going to be much more neophobic than predators. Adults are, and so juveniles are much more neophobic than adults. Captive animals tend to be more neophobic than wild animals of a species. But you have to understand this within that species, because there's also a range within each species. So yes, it is an evolutionary survival tactic, but it can also be a cost to the animal. If you, within a population, if you have an animal that is more neophobic than its mate down the road, it's going to miss out on access to food, for social rewards, mates and other things. So there's got to be a balance. So that's the first thing. And then the other way it gets talked about is when it's really from at ground level, like you and me, who actually are at the coalface of doing trapping, and you've put out those field cameras, and you are seeing how animals behave around your traps, and you see things like this cat that's come up, had a sniff, and walked off. We didn't catch that cat, it didn't go into that trap. And it's this thing about, why is this animal showing indifference or total disinterest in your trap? And then you've got to nut out why. And then there's this thing about induced shyness, where there's actually a causal relationship, that the animal has had an encounter with a trap, maybe had a miscatch, and has now learnt that going into that trap is a really bad thing, and won't go into any other traps. And so, you know, I think you should actually think about how you're conceptualising trap shyness in your head, because it really makes a big difference about how you think about solving this problem. And I'll illustrate this a bit more. So, how would you know if you had trap shy stoats in your environment? And it comes back to what Sian was saying about you've got to monitor. You really got to monitor to know what's going on out there in your environment. You need to have, like us, we're monitoring our kiwi chicks. Those are our indicator species to see how well we're doing in our project. They're telling us more than our trapping is whether we have trap shy stoats in our environment or not, because you know, when our kiwi chick gets killed by a stoat and hasn't chosen that rather than going in a trap, you know, we know we've got an issue. It's also your detective work. You know, field cameras have just revolutionised this, but working out how animals are interacting with your traps is really valuable information. And also doing some sort of monitoring that's going to get an idea of your size of your pest population you're trying to target. That's pretty crucial. We have those tools pretty well for possums and stoats, and they're developing for, possums and rats, but they're developing for stoats. And the camera trap protocol that Craig Gillies is doing is looking really promising, as to provide sort of a relative index of a stoat population in an area over time. But you've got to put that mahi in to get that information. Plus, you need to be interrogating your data, particularly if you've been running for more than 5 years. You're starting to build up some really good data, And you need to actually look at what you're catching. What's that telling you? These days we're all collecting data about age and sex of our catch traps. That can be really valuable information to understand which animals in your target population you are actually catching. And it also will tell you which traps are catching, which locations you're catching animals in. That's really valuable information. So you need to use all those tools to, work out if you do have a trap shy issue you've got to have to address. Now I want to talk about, I don't think really we pay too much attention to thinking about trap shy animals when we start setting up our predator trap networks. We just assume that every pest is going to be like every other member of its species and they'll be equally trappable. And experience tells you it's not quite like that. And it also tells you, there's also lots of studies that tell you that of the individualism in species. And I can remember just last year reading about Jamie McCauley's study on the diet of weasels and stoats in Fiordland, Southwestland versus Northwest Nelson forests, and seeing that what they preyed on was quite diverse for different. Down in Southland they hardly eat any birds, but up in Nelson Lakes they were scoffing a lot of birds. So, and even within the population of stoats at Nelson Lakes there was quite a variation in to identify a significant difference in what individual stoats were eating. So you've got to think of these animals more like ourselves in the sense that we're all individuals, but we're all labelled humans, but we are all individuals really, and it's the same with our target animals. They are all within have individualistic characteristics within the population. So even Kim King, if you read some of her work, she has described how she had set up trail cameras on tracking tunnels to see how stoats interacted with them. And she detected 45 stoats on the camera, 8 of which never went through any of those tracking tunnels. So if you don't do that kind of work, you don't get to see that. So don't assume that every animal is the same. And the factors that affect this trappability is there's some key things like age. Like I say, juveniles are often more neophobic than adults, but it depends on your species, because I spent quite a bit of time trapping magpies. When magpies were just coming into the Waimana Valley, there was a few of us who started trapping magpies, and it was really interesting. We thought we had about 35 magpies to get, and like 200 magpies later, a flock of juveniles sort of had turned up. But when we were trapping out our family groups, we saw this classic pattern where we catch the juvenile, then we catch the female, and then we catch the male. And that just repeated over and over again. So yeah, it's relative to the species. Sex is a big variable, can make it quite a difference. As you know, like for stoats, males and females are got quite different home ranges. Females might travel 2 to 3 kilometres on a daily basis, but males will travel like 15 k's on a daily basis. And it was quite interesting when I was trapping stoats in Te Urewera. We started to see this pattern build up over time, that every September and October we would stop trapping female stoats, and then they'd reappear in the data again in November. And that's because of their breeding, and we obviously didn't have enough traps in their home range at that time of the year to catch those female stoats. Social status is a big thing. Social hierarchies, you see this a lot in your prey species like rats. The dominant animal will be the one who's coming into your bait station, not necessarily your less dominant animal. Came across this study from Vancouver who are doing a capture mark release study of urban rats, and they predominantly caught adult male rats. And that was that they had a significant lack of female and juvenile rats in their sample size. And then there's the seasonal factors. You know, when you get a mast year of good fruiting and you're up against it and trying to compete to get an animal to come into your trap and eat your bait when there's plenty of good tucker on the trees or live prey running around, and it can be really difficult. So you've got to factor all these things into your thinking about your trapping. The next assumption I've called your trapping counterability. There's a sort of assumption that quite often you might have joined a project, there'll already be a trap network in place, or you have the benefit of starting from scratch and you're trying to plan how you're going to do this. There's an assumption that, you know, either that trap network is sufficient, it's going to be good enough, or you, as we are all learning more about this business of where you put a trap. Now, the Predator Free 2050 and Doc did this really good practical guide to trapping, and that gives you basically the prescription you should use for your different pest animals that you're trying to target. For instance, it tells us that for stoats you should be spacing your traps no wider than 200 metres apart, and that's because if you space them wider than that you're going to lose the ability to trap female stoats. And you should have your trap lines sort of 800 to 1 kilometre apart. That's the prescription, and you set them out on natural features like ridges, rivers, roads, etc. And it's a really easy, those prescriptions are really easy to apply. They're really good for the bean counters because you can actually work out to quite detail how many traps you need, what they'll cost, etc. But I would say that this is a really good starting point. It's just a starting point. Don't see it as the end point. And you have to marry that information with what your baseline monitoring has been telling you about your habitat, your pest species, what's the density of that pest species, where are they, etc. And it's probably, in my view, that this Predator Free 2050 booklet really is still describing what you'd be called traditional suppression program layouts, because it seems to me when I look at what the eradication projects are doing, they're looking at much greater density of traps, and they're putting traps places that you would never have thought to put with these traditional layouts. So definitely use it as a starting point, and rather than an end. So, you know, when you're designing a trap layout, it's really good to have an estimate of what your target population is, know their home range, know what their daily movements look like. Like a stoats is just a zigzag sort of all over the show. And there's heaps of information now coming through from this new science we're getting that will help inform you about home ranges and daily movements and preferred habitats, so tap into that. But you also have to nowadays know what their prey species, if you're targeting predators, you want to know what their prey species are doing. If you're targeting prey, you need to know what the forest is doing. So you have to connect all the dots. You have to basically be an ecologist to understand the whole picture, and that'll put you in a better space when you start designing your trap layouts. And yeah, so basically you're trying to put a trap or traps into the home range of all your animals, so you build up that accountability. Don't just assume accountability. And give you an example of this from the Kiwi project. We thought we were pretty good when we started out. Take Koi Point, we had 23 traps. That was pretty much on a standard layout. We had them round the, sort of going right round the Koi Point, following the public walking track really, and some on the adjoining farmland and things. We thought we were pretty good. We caught stoats, yep. But then we added 12 more traps in 2017. We thought we could put them on the internal bridge. We caught 9 stoats in 4 weeks over December, January that year. Did we have a trap shy problem? No, we had a trap accountability issue. So be aware of that. And now we've taken that lesson on board and we put out more traps into Koi Point. We've got 128 traps now, and we've focused them on onto some other internal spurs and areas that we thought would be above shag roosting areas and out near the petrol burrows to that stoats were there, so let's put some traps out there. But you know, and we have actually caught stoats on the new lines. Every time I put a new line in, I've caught a stoat on it. What does that tell you? But apparently that's still not going to be good enough, because the Kiwi Trust has had a review of its trapping project done this year by BOP and they are now recommending that we have 300 traps in Koi Point. So they say we don't have to trap all of them in the all the time. We might have to set some of those at certain times of the year. But you get the picture, don't you? You get the picture that if you want to target animals, you've got to have enough traps out there for them to encounter. Because at the end of the day, even if all this new technology about using scent and using sound to bring animals to your trap, at the end of the day, they've still got to encounter that trap and they've still got to go in it. So if you've got your trap layout and you think you're still missing animals, then let's have a look at how many traps you've got in the environment. Now, coming to this whole topic about induced shyness. Now this is really good, because you can handle this. This is up to you whether you create this or whether you prevent it. For me, I always start with that delivery of traps from the supplier, or whether you're building them yourself. Don't assume that every trap is going to be the same. It looks the same, but don't assume it's the same. Go through every single trap. A sample of 10 out of a supply of 100 is not enough. Go through every single trap and check it over, because you'll be surprised at what you can find. Even the best quality made traps, there'll always be something. And things that I've come across is the entrance hole wasn't cut in the mesh. The trap was poorly installed in the trap, so when you tried to set it off, it actually didn't go off, it caught on the side of the wall. The walls of the trap were the wrong dimensions, so there was not enough gap between the top of the wall and the lid, so the lids actually sat on top of the traps and wouldn't let the traps go off. Holes cut the wrong size. There's all sorts of things that you can actually find when you start going through your traps. So doing that audit of the quality of the trap that's been built for you or delivered to you, and don't assume that the mechanisms that come from the supplier are all the same either, because check everyone for their trigger weights and check the manufacturing, because I've come across traps that come from the manufacturer and there's been a fault in them and they don't set and they don't work. It's no good taking those traps out into the field. This is the first port of call for stopping induced trap shyness. And if you've got traps in your field and you've put them out there without doing that check, we'll go and check them. And if they've been out there for a while, go and audit them and check their treader weights and things like that, because the Kiwi Trust has certainly found all its early traps that we put out 20 years ago. I mean, we look at them now, they have those sharp edges on them, the entrance, and you know, but we've had another issue for our project, which is Weka, which has meant we've actually having to cycle out all our old traps and put in Weka length traps. So it's been quite a big job for us, but it's well worth paying attention to this space. And it's the same whether you've got a sentinel possum trap or a Victor rat trap. These are just common issues that you should be focusing on. And yeah, whoops. Oh yeah, this is really my pet hate. Having been a rat trapper for over 10 years, I got taught that using using Victor professional rat traps in either a core flute or wooden tunnel, that you have to have, the tunnel's got to fit the trap. And that's so that you can guide your rodent over the kill bar, so you get a lethal and humane kill. You don't want them running around the sides of your traps and getting partially caught and then pulling out, and then you've induced trap shyness in your rat. But it seems to me that since I've seen predator-free, some people hate me for saying this, but I've seen a lot of T-Rexes and Snappies and things going into what was the professional Victor rat tunnel, and it's too big. The tunnel's too big for the trap, and I just think that you might be asking for trouble here. But I'm open to those who have been involved in these rat trapping projects to see, your feedback on what you've actually found. How many toes? Yeah. I know you would have liked me to tell the tips and tricks about how to get that trap shy animal, but I really feel like there is actually enough information out there. And these guys, Cam Speedy and John Bissell, if you haven't already had them to your project or watched their webinars or YouTube videos, then it's time you started, because they're telling you all you need to know about really successful trapping. So I'm not going to go through it, but it's all there. What they say, all your volunteers might not become predator hunters like John Bissell, but they should at least have the basics about how to have a stable trap set, the entrances aren't blocked up so animals can't get in, that you're actually positioning it where the animal's going to be, all those sorts of things. They're just basic things. Okay, and then of course there's the art of luring too. I mean, they talk a lot about this, but in my view, freshness of your bait is always key. So if you've caught a rat, then yeah, definitely use that. And you can condition your traps. If you, they all arrive with that tantalised timber smell. Well, think about maybe doing a bit of weathering, because they'll put them out in the field. It'll take a few months before they weather in and lose that strange smell. Okay, and then you got your trappers, trapper factor. These are key. These are the people. None of this would happen without the people. And I think quite often we underestimate how skilled a trapping is. It's really skilled, especially if you start having to bring in all this thinking about the ecology of your target animal. But these people are really, really key people. So train them up, value them, and appreciate what they do for you. Just to kind of finish off our experience with trap shy stoats and the Kiwi Trust, I mean, we've recognised through our Kiwi Trick mine we have a problem. We've tried to focus on upgrading our traps and our trapper skills. We've tried increasing our density. We've tried using alternatives to trapping. We've tried using PAP. We probably, when it became easier to do this, with the change to notification procedures in 2015, we had a go of using PAP. It's really a labour-intensive process. It has lots of promise as a lethal thing for stoats, but our biggest issue was fly strike. In our warm climes down here, we'd put out a fresh meatball and we'd find that it almost immediately being struck by blowflies, and then you just have a seething mass of maggots on your tracking card. Lovely. So, there was a lot of work for not much result really. But we're really interested in what is happening down Southland with PAP and meat in those sausages and Spitfires, and we really hope that someone's going to trial this out in a weaker area to see how effective putting a bit of meat out, meat sausage out in the environment. Who's going to get there first, the stoat or the weka? So in conclusion, I hope you take away a few thoughts from this kōrero about thinking that your target population is not homogenous. It's stratified just like human societies. That don't assume that your trap layout is fit for purpose. review it periodically. Do everything you can to reduce that induced shyness by making sure your traps are in good working order, that they will go off when the animal comes into your trap, and take on board all that information that is out there on the web for you for that. Yeah, so that's me. Any questions?
We're doing pretty well at the moment. We're way back up on time again, so if there are questions, then I'm quite happy to take some. Bang, there you go, all on the line.
Yeah, so I was curious whether you had actually done any analysis on the stomach contents of the soaps you're dealing with.
We did have a PhD student a few years ago do a study on stoats, and we all collected in stoats for her, and she did do stomach dissections. She was her thesis was about seeing whether you could get DNA off the stomach contents of the animal, and she did manage to demonstrate that. We were also using her research to see if we could do a match between the stoats that we caught and the kiwi chicks that had been predated, to see if we could link up the predator to the chick that had been deaf, and unfortunately we couldn't manage to do that. But yes, what we came out of those stomach contents, we saw that the stoats were eating a range of species, blackbirds, hares, skinks, mero, tui. We didn't actually find any kiwi evidence in the stoat contents that we sampled. Yeah, but that's quite. I'm still looking for someone who's going to dissect out the anal glands of the stoat in our project, so I can collect those magic juices so we can use it as a lure. But yeah, no one's come forward yet.
An enticing offer. I'm sure there's someone out here that wants to do that job. Another question? Yes. Who's going to go first? No squabbling.
If you put a set of effective traps in an untrapped area, you'll presumably reasonably quickly kill the untrapped shy animals. Are you at risk of running a selective breeding program for more and more trapped shy stoats?
Yes, because it's always the survivors who go on to breed, who go on to carry on that journey. And it's particularly problematic when you have a species like stoats, because the female takes her young out hunting with her, so they're getting a first-hand education when they're young about what to feed on and what to avoid. So yeah, that is the issue, and I think that's the whole part of my message here is don't just think your population is all the same.
We have inherited a number of old traps, and you mentioned the problems with new traps, and I'm a bit concerned about our traps over the last few months because they've been out in the rain and they're looking pretty. And you mentioned treadle weights. How did you go about testing treadle weights and sort of thing?
We just make up a series of weights. We got 50 and 80 and 100, and it's just a matter of using your safety catch on the trap and applying your weights one at a time, and just have enough weights to see, if you go past 100, add 10 grams at a time and see what they get up to. But then you may also realise that you may have spring tension working in your trap. So if you then set your trap off and reset it and then do that process again, you might find that that trap does go off, which is why you should be encouraging all your volunteers to periodically do a controlled set-off of your traps so you release that spring tension.
I'm not aware of any safety catches on these. I think I'll be lowering on a long bit of string.
You definitely use, long bits of string. We use long bits of string, yeah.
Cool. And we have one more question right over
Kia ora.
Kia ora. having urban areas on either side of where you work, do you find cats an issue? And if they are, how do you deal with it?
Yes, can be an issue. Yes, it can be quite a sensitive issue. So we actually did a cat trapping exercise in Koi Point, probably about 2013, 14. We actually did, and people know about this too because he was involved, and we basically took the line of setting live capture traps around the outside and we used leg holds on interior lines, and we did about a month straight trapping, daily checks on all these traps because they were all, basically they weren't kill traps. But prior to doing that, we visited every neighbour to the reserve and talked to them about doing the cat trapping, and talked to them about what would happen if we caught their cat. And we encouraged them to put on a collar, we encouraged them to keep the cats inside while we did the exercise. So, a lot of it is about trying to do the advocacy, stick within the rules, and we try to avoid trapping domestic cats and use our kill traps in more remote areas and use live capture closer to the urban areas, basically.
Thank you, Gaye. Appreciate that. We've got a little something for you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you almost got caught.